Ready to go. Can't hear you. Try again. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Can anybody else hear David? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Good evening. Thanks for bearing with me with the technical difficulties. How are you, Rabbi Eisenberg?
Oh, Hashem, very well. How are you? Interesting topic for tonight.
Very interesting topic. And it's very hot here in my part of Prestwich. I don't know how it is where you are.
I'm in the shrubs, and the shrubs has always been a cool place.
Okay, well, it's where all the cool kids hang out.
That's what it is.
It is an interesting topic, so we may as well get right into it. There is a popular notion that a lot of people end up in Manchester due to economic reasons. So I very often refer to them as economic migrants coming from London, gaining married.
Migrating to the north.
Yeah, and they head north. And the reason that they head north is, generally speaking, it's cheaper. It's cheaper to buy your first house. It's easier to get your kids into school. The waiting lists are much shorter. Certainly that's the case with Jewish schools. Life can be a little bit more convenient, just in terms of planning ahead and getting around and having to travel to appointments and so on. You don't need to leave yourself sort of 2-hour windows for a dentist appointment. You can get there in 15 minutes if you wish. So there are a lot of efficiencies that sells Manchester to people that don't currently live here. However strong that pull is to Manchester for economic reasons for certain couples, and I would wager they tend to be, I see a lot more Haredi couples coming across this way than the other way. I would say for a lot of middle of the road Jewish people, for our young people, and those are those people that are perhaps leaving home for the first time to go to university or whatever else it may be. London has a much stronger pull for them than their hometown of Manchester, and I suppose we wanted to try and examine that a little bit tonight, Rabbi.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting that the way this topic actually came to me is actually a conversation I had years ago. I think it was with Mike Lewis and Will Kintish. So there was a chevra of what's called like-minded friends. I think it was Michael Lewis and Will Kintish and David Cohen, if I remember correctly. Those are the three people that were together. And one of them, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Michael Lewis. Said to me, he made a list of all children and grandchildren of his friends, and he said almost every single one of them lives in London. Maybe bar one, they all lived in London. And I'm finding more and more that, people are going down to London. And there are reasons to go down to London. There are reasons to come back to Manchester. And I don't know this. The question of Manchester being enough for our children. Remember Johnny Kalmus, Ralph Donner's son-in-law, Johnny.
Yeah.
You know Johnny?
Yeah.
So
he was a journalist, wasn't he?
Pardon?
He was a journalist at one point.
Yeah, he was writing for the Jewish Chronicle at one point. Yeah. And I think he was going to write an article that he felt that Manchester middle-of-the-road Jewry was shrinking to the point where it wouldn't be viable soon. And even though it looks a very viable community, he said it really had to do with the fact that the Haredim were bumping up the numbers. So you look at Manchester and say, wow, Manchester, look how many Jews are in Manchester. But he says, but if you isolate it down to the middle-of-the-road Jewry, you start to see that a lot of those kids are moving down to London, and you don't really have a great middle-of-the-road contingent, for want of a better word. And the question is that really true? I don't know that it's true. I don't really have the figures. Has anybody ever done any research on this?
I'm not sure if a study has been done in terms of our, the numbers of sort of the migration, if you like. I do know that a lot of Jewish kids, and I think this is a good thing in general, but Mancunians choose not to go to university in Manchester. So if leaving home and going to university is their first sort of taste of adulthood and moving away, although I'd argue that the parents don't often feel that it's a complete cut of the umbilical cord at that stage, because it's still a very expensive outing. But I mean, if you look at where the kids are choosing to go to university, and this is as much about the universities as it is about the cities, but it's places like Nottingham, it's places like Leeds and Birmingham, and then you've obviously got all the London universities as well that are great. I think, though, what's drawing them to live in London and to actually sort of settle there is that there's a lot more going on in terms of cultural and social activities for young Jewish people. And it really forces us to ask the question, why are we so bad at catering towards our younger people here in Manchester? What is it that we're incapable of giving them that they actually need?
Well, I would start with the following. I think this is the first thing that somebody mentioned to me. I had this conversation actually. We had guests this week, Shabbos, and they said they had lived in London for 10 years. So we had Beth and Daniel Feingold. You know Beth Feingold?
Yeah, sure.
So Beth and Daniel lived in London for 10 years before they moved here. And Daniel said to me, he said, look, unless you have some kind of very large bank of daddy to bankroll you, how in the world are you going to get on the property ladder? How are you ever going to start to make it there? Although people seem to somehow make it. But I think that the biggest thing, I think, for young Jewish people beyond the culture is the allure of meeting a partner. Meaning to say, like if I were to ask you now, Dial's in KD.
Yeah.
She probably knows most of her peers and probably knows 1 or 2 years above her as well. So that when it comes to finding a partner within Manchester, you'd be like, I grew up with all these people in school. They don't speak to me as people that I want to marry. I think people often want to look outside of their platonic relationship circle to start looking for somebody who is marriageable. Do you know what I mean?
That may be, and then in which case, if you're saying to me, if your kid then sort of marries somebody from London, is there enough on offer for somebody who grew up in London to want to actually move to the sticks in Manchester? Because I think that's the way that they see it. I think that we're a small town compared to what's going on in northwest London.
I think we can call a spade a spade. We are a small town. I think the entire thing, every time I go down to London, I am just absolutely amazed at the sheer size of the city. The city is just, when you go into the city and you see what's going on over there, you walk around the center of Manchester and it seems pretty quiet. And suddenly you walk into the center. Have you ever taken the train down to London? You know what I mean? It's quite quiet around Piccadilly, and you go into the train and it's very, very relaxed. And when you come into London, into Euston, and you walk outside Euston Square with a tube and everything, and suddenly you see so many more. It's like we've multiplied by 6 times the amount of people, and everyone's walking. It's like walking through traffic. It just turns into a whole different story. Do you not find that when you get to London?
I do. It's sort of like an explosion, a population explosion on your doorstep there as soon as you arrive. Although the past couple of times I've been there, it's been very strange because with COVID, it feels a bit more of a ghost town. At least central London does.
Yeah.
But Bev, if we look at one of the comments here, Bev Voss, good evening, Bev. She says the same when you're older. Everybody in Manchester knows everybody in Manchester.
That's probably true. But you know what? If we were to isolate the little communities in London, you'd probably say, a lot of people in Woodside Park know everybody else in Woodside Park. It's just that there's 30 or 40 of those Woodside Parks around, and so therefore there's so many more people.
Do you think we're guilty of making, at least in our community, are we guilty of making it too much of a small town mentality, i.e., every rumor, every somebody sneezes, it's headlines in the Jewish Telegraph next Friday. Are we guilty of being that kind of place?
We might be, but being a small place brings that with it. The bottom line is you have to realize that as a small place, that's what it's going to be. I think if you were to think about it, I think if you look in middle of the road, I think somebody said, what did the most recent census actually show? I think the most recent census shows that there were 45,000 Jews in Manchester. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if we've even had the numbers back, but it'll show many, many more than the 2011 census, that's for sure. So you'll see a massive growth of the community, but if you were to break down the growth of the community,
yes,
you would find that it tends to come from one pocket more than another. And when I hear that, I mean, I've voiced this opinion many times. I tend to sort of say, well, no, that can't be right. It's not only because the Haredi community is growing in numbers faster than the rest of us, but Jackie Buxbaum, for instance, has for a long, long time held the opinion that the other side of the community is contracting at the same rate that you guys are growing, if you like, and it works because Manchester's extremely small, so there is overlap between those two communities. We shop in the same place. It's not like there is a Berlin Wall and we don't go past that wall into Salford and then that's it. It's there is a bit of mixing going on.
Yeah, I mean, but it is quite small. Like, for example, I don't know that in London you would have 5 shuls similar to our shul in a patch of a square mile. So you got Heaton Park Shul, which has nearly 1,000 members, and you got our shul, which is nearly 1,000 members. You got Holy Law, and you got Steen Court, and you have all those 4 shuls, and you probably have the Meat Hill also, which is, although it is quite a bit smaller. But even if we take these 4 shuls, I think in London, in an area the size of ours, you'd have only 1 shul, and it would be like a mega shul, and it would have like 2,000 member families or something like that.
So I think the North London equivalent of somewhere like our shul, and I don't just say it because they have Rabbi Ginsburg, but would be somewhere like Raleigh Close, which let's face it, they have Rabbi Ginsburg.
They do. But I mean,
they also have, I think, if you were to go there on a Shabbos morning, at least at its height, there must be sort of 5 or 6 minyanim sort of running simultaneously there.
Absolutely. I mean, but as far as numbers are concerned, I mean, I think they have 2,500 members, when we have about 1,000 or something like that, or 800. They are 3 times the size of us, and they're the only United Synagogue in the entirety of Hendon. No, it's not true. I think there's Alei Zion also. There's another, it's a much smaller United Synagogue style shul. But they're the only United Synagogue in that whole area. Golders Green has only 1 United Synagogue. Finchley has only 1 United Synagogue. Whereas we, in an area about the size of Hendon, because Hendon is massive. I remember when I once stayed in Hendon, I had to go from North Hendon to regular Hendon. I walked for half an hour from one part of Hendon to the other, which is about as long as it is from one side of Broughton Park to the other, or from Prestwich all the way to the end of Broughton Park. You'd walk about half an hour. And you'd find that only 1 United Synagogue shul in that kind of area, because they're not going to open up 3. Because the truth is, I think that's part of being centralized. Because they're a centralized organization, it's not worth the while to open up 2 or 3 United Synagogues within that same patch of 3 square miles. They just will have 1, and anybody who's United Synagogue in that entire patch will have to come to any United Synagogue. Whereas we have the Rabbi Yossi Chazan, and we have Rabbi Daniel Walker, and we got Rabbi Simmons, and we have myself, and we all provide something different. And so we have 4 different shuls because we're private, so we have that.
So you've got that, but we're looking at it from a sort of a shul perspective, but Jewish life is more than a shul, and I think it's often described as being more exciting in London, whereas in Manchester we're a little bit more functional. We get life done, we get our schools done, we get education done, everything's good. You can buy whatever you need in a kosher shop. But it's not quite the heady heights of here we go, Saul Charkham. In Edgware, postcode HA8, there are 15 shuls. I think there's probably mixed shuls, though, aren't they, Saul, they're going to be different denominations. So you'll have
Absolutely. Well, in
Yeah.
Broughton Park, in M7, you'll have a lot more than 15 shuls. I promise you that. I could probably count 15 shuls. Northumberland Street has 7 shuls. Do you know what I mean? You got
Yeah.
2 Satmars, you got Chodosh, you got the Aguda, you got the Machziki Adas, you have Chernobyl. You know, you have about, I think I counted out 6 shuls over there. So there's no lack of shuls on streets in Manchester. But, you know, and M7 is full of them. And even M25 is sort of,
Let me ask you a question then. From a Haredi perspective, getting your kids married off and them settling in Manchester, is that seen as settling for less, or is that seen as actually it's quite a good place to raise your kids?
it depends who you ask.
I'm asking you.
No. What I'm saying is the following. I don't think I've settled at all. You know, I'm very, very happy where I am here in Manchester, and I don't see the allure of London. You know, not at the moment for sure. But I know that friends of mine who have married girls from London ended up staying in London because those girls have said, there's no way I'm moving up to the little shtetl called Manchester. So lots of London people have a very grand idea of London, and they just like, I'm not moving out of here. Whatever it is, we're going to make it work. But it could mean paying £2,500 to £3,000 a month on rent. It could mean spending £450,000 on a 2-bed apartment. You know, when here in Manchester I don't have to ask, I mean, I could ask you, but you're the one who would really know. For £450,000, you get a lot more bang for your buck here in Presters than you would get in Henry.
It's huge. The difference is it's a gulf of difference in terms of value for money. And I just don't understand. Listen, there's a part of me that doesn't understand how my own children are going to buy houses here in Prestwich. Never mind how they would afford to buy them in London. But I've got sisters living in London, and I saw what they had to spend on property to buy their first house, and it's a ridiculous difference. And I wonder how the economics of that works. So I wonder how people can afford over there to get on the ladder. Is it the bank of mum and dad? Is it, you know, our parents sort of downsizing and then releasing equity from their homes to allow their kids to have they amassed more wealth? I don't know what the story is, but the economics of it don't make any sense to me.
No, I don't know how they do it either. You know, I mean, in the end of the day, you want to buy a decent house in London, you're going to need a down payment of at least £200,000, right? Because that's 25%. So if you want 25% of that of an £800,000 house, which is not a massive house in Golders Green nowadays, we're going to have to see what you're going to do with that. Add to that, by the way, if you want to borrow £600,000 from the bank, your wife and you need to probably be making somewhere in the region of £150,000 to be able to borrow that kind of money from the bank. So the bank's only willing to give you a multiple of 4, as I remember it.
So as I understand it, there is a weighting on London salaries. London salaries are slightly higher than you might experience elsewhere to account for the higher living costs. But from what I can see, they're not that much more. They're certainly not double.
They need to be triple or something. I remember speaking to Rabbi Ginsby once about a post that was it was a post not for a rabbi, for a different post within the United Synagogue, and they were offering over £100,000. And I spoke to 2 people, Rabbi Ginsby and somebody else, and they both said to me, £100,000 is not going to cut it. I mean, it wasn't a job for me anyway. I wasn't inquiring for myself. I'll just make that very clear. It wasn't for me. It was a different kind of job.
You're worth double that amount, let me tell you. Maybe not here, I don't know, but you're definitely worth double that amount.
Pass that on to finance, David, in your name.
Yeah, they're very understanding people, very generous men. Let's have a look at some comments here. Daniel Feingold. I feel it's just about kids trying to get out of the Manchester bubble. Some come back when they have a family. So there is that there is that sense that Manchester feels very sort of claustrophobic, very cloistered, we tend to smother each other here in Manchester. We're on top of each other. We know each other's business. If you were to name me pretty much anybody in the community, even if I wasn't intimately involved with them, I'd be able to tell you who they are, what they do, and approximately where they live. And this is Manchester for you. This is the kind of town that we live in. I remember when I was a teenager, a lot of my peers talked about getting away from Manchester like it was a prison they had to get out of. And the first step away from that for many of them was that they went to do a year in Israel or something like that. But that broke the kind of familial ties to Manchester. And then it set them up for going wherever else they were going to go. And if I sort of look around, quite a few of them did move away. They're no longer here.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't grow up here, so I can't really comment. I would say growing up in Vienna, Manchester is a massive place comparatively. Vienna, Vienna, everybody knows everybody. In Vienna, we probably have somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 Jews, which makes Vienna much, much smaller than Manchester. It's probably a fifth of the size, 1/6 of the size of what it is over here, depending on what the numbers really are. And so therefore, everybody really knew everybody over there. So for me, Manchester is massive. And the truth is, I think if you live in the Haredi community, which I've been living here for 14 years, when I came here, I knew almost everyone in Prestwich because Prestwich was small. But I must tell you that Prestwich has grown and grown in the last 14 years that I've been here. And now I don't know everybody anymore. There's a lot of younger people, and I'm not sort of like trying to find out who all the new young marrieds are. And so, yeah, you don't know who everybody is. There are a lot more people. But I think maybe in the, I would say it's less so in the middle of the road communities, because I don't know that there's been an influx of hundreds of families from outside of Manchester that have moved to middle of the road communities within Manchester. So that all the middle of the road people here within Manchester have more or less remained the same, or the kids have come back. And you might have another 5-10 families within our shul that have moved back. But you won't have, like when you go to a shul in Prestwich or in Broughton Park, you can have half the shul of people that are either from London or from Switzerland or from Antwerp or wherever they might be from. They're just not originally from Manchester, which makes it feel a lot more cosmopolitan, which I think doesn't happen in our community, does it? Oh, we've lost Sassam and you again. Slightly. We're getting a crackle. Do you want to try without the headphones? Is it your headphones?
Can you hear that?
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay. We've gone without earphones. Look, we don't tend to attract all the exotic varieties that you might do on the other side of the community. But a lot depends where these shidduchim are being made as well. So you've got a lot of people coming from Antwerp and Belgium and Gateshead and loads from London as well. We've got a few comments here that we can work through.
Let's see Richard.
This is an interesting one because Richard obviously originally from Liverpool. A lot of it depends on your starting perspective. Moving from Liverpool to Manchester felt like enough of an increase in community size. But for me, it's difficult to imagine how our children will find their future spouses if it's not someone they have grown up with. It may be that many of our children feel that they have to move to London to meet their spouse, but then perhaps move back once they are married. So
that's very true. What Richard is saying, I've heard again and again, but I think the last part of the sentence is really where we start to get into trouble. Because if your kid moves down to London to find their spouse and gets a job and starts to get integrated, many times they say to themselves, I'm not coming back. What am I coming back for? Daddy, I know it was great in Manchester when we grew up, but my life is here now, and I'm just going to try to make the most of it over here. So the fact that perhaps they move back once they are married, that's really where the problems start to come in, I think, for people from Manchester.
We've got some other comments from people that come from smaller communities. So Phil Morrison, lots of Irish couples left Dublin and Belfast because Manchester seems friendlier than London, like Dublin used to be in the olden days.
So they moved here, a lot of Irish people, I guess, rather than moving to London.
We had a whole influx of Dubliners at some point. I guess that must be now going back sort of 14, 15 years ago at least. I remember quite a few all made the move together. They seem to all be friends. And yeah, they do like that kind of small town feel to Manchester. Michael Gasworth, I'd say that 95% of members of Netzach Yisrael, Steen Court, are people who are not originally born in Manchester and have either moved here due to cost or married into a Manchester family. Yeah, no, fair.
So there you go. So you do have from the middle of the road community also, and I think it does become something for a lot of people. It's an economic choice, as Richard says on the bottom. If you look at the final comment, Richard said, "Will they be able to afford to buy in London?" Right? He's right. Will they be able to afford to buy in London? I have no idea, and I don't know. Again, as you said before, I have no idea how people from anywhere really manage it.
You know what? We lived in London for the first 2 years when we were married, and when we were first married, I should say. And that first 2 years, my overriding memory was that yes, there were more restaurants, and yes, there's more cultural activity, and yes, we seem to get invited out by somebody else for every other meal or whatever it was. It was exciting socially. But my overriding memory was I never ever had any money. Everything was going on rent, everything was going on council tax, and then every other bill you can name after that. But just to make the rent, I think it ate up maybe 95% of my salary. It was really difficult, and
But
so
isn't it true that
that
people
was not
say?
my it was not my idea of fun back then. Just gonna have
So would people say like, all right, David, but that's, you're newly married, it's a beginning job, but you'll work your way up the ladder, and as you get a better job, you'll suddenly have more money, and just wait it out and sit it out.
Yeah, I could have, I could have sat it out. But for me, there was always a good enough reason to come back. So starting a family, for instance, would have been a lot harder in London, I think, sort of away from, parents and stuff like that. However helpful they can sometimes be, or not. But generally speaking, most people want to be within close proximity. So you've got all of that extra support if you need it. So, it's for me, I think that the move back to Manchester was it always felt temporary. We always promised ourselves we were going to go somewhere else afterwards, but after a while, you understand that this isn't a bad place to live at all. And in actual fact, all the things that you hated about coming from a small town when you were a kid growing up here come into its own. It's nice to have a neighbor that knew you when you were 5 years old and is able to sort of check in on you and see if you need anything. It's nice to pretty much know everybody, and kind of know how things work as well. You're not ever sat there scratching your head wondering how to get from A to Z here. There's always somebody you can pick up the phone to. So for me, I mean, you'll know this as well. If you need advice from somebody in the community, it's easy to do that here. There are good people that will help you.
Yeah, it's very easy. I mean, and again, because it's a small pool of people, but they know what they're talking about, you'll always know if I need A, this is the man I'm going to go to. If I need B, this is the lady that I can go to for advice. But I will say something else, which is interesting. I remember now about a year and a half ago, I went to Toronto to visit my brother who lives in Toronto. And there's a fellow there that's a rabbi in a very big shul that I used to be friends with when we were both teenagers. And he actually made it a lot bigger than I did because he became. You ever heard of a Rhodes Scholar? You ever heard of that?
I've heard of that. Yeah, it sounds.
It's basically, I mean, basically, you get a scholarship and you go to like Oxford for a year for free, and then it's like something that Bill Clinton had. It's like very, very high up, and this guy got one of those Rhodes scholarships. He's a genius of a guy, really, really clever fellow, both in Torah and in secular, and very, very clever fellow. And he got a very big job in London, in Toronto, in a very, very big community. And I told him I was coming up. I'd like to see him, and he said, "Yeah, no problem." And we sat down. I sat down in his community. I done chachris there, and we sat for half an hour. We spoke afterwards, and it was interesting how he said to me that the people in his area also are wondering how their kids will be able to afford houses. I mean, because that part of Toronto where his shul was, where my brother's in-laws live, and where he lives now, also very, very expensive. And it was basically everybody had there were these small plots of houses that they built for immigrants, and it meant that if you wanted to build a big house, you could actually just buy the cheap house off the immigrant, raise it to the ground, and start again, build a massive thing. And I was told that the houses there, on average, are between 2 and 4 million Canadian dollars each, right? And so they were also saying, you know, how are our children going to be able to afford to live in Toronto?
I think, you know what, that's it's a question that not only we are trying to answer here in Manchester, and so in general, a lot of people, a lot of parents across this country will be wondering how on earth their children are going to buy houses at some point. It's one of those questions that get debated a lot in the newspapers as well when you see sort of rising house prices and how it's all going to work. Because wages are not rising exponentially with the cost of living necessarily. So these are all sort of wide open questions. If you don't mind, Rabbi, we have a guest that is waiting. I can see waiting in the wings. I'm going to put him in just a moment. But I just want to cover off a couple of the comments that we've already had, and then we'll bring our friend in. So Sharon Hood, it's funny because coming from a tiny community, I take it that's Hull.
That's Leicester.
Where is it?
Leicester.
Is it Leicester? Okay.
Yes.
Manchester is just so exciting. I'm always amazed that I meet new people all the time who I haven't met over the past 15 years. Manchester is certainly friendlier than London, in my opinion, although Edgware isn't too bad. And then again, Leicester Road is a bit dead of an evening. Yeah, it's not the sort of place you can let your hair down necessarily. Clive Moss Barkley, as we previously discussed, Manchester is becoming mainly a Haredi town. And Daniel from Beth, the King David Crescent School was a big pull for me, having lived in London with the cost of childcare and the lack of parental support. I suppose if, you know, cost is always going to be one of those factors.
So I think we'll have to come back to that. I think schools will be an interesting one to come back to also, but let's bring in our guest.
We'll speak to our friend. So we mentioned earlier that our side of the community doesn't attract, exotic guests. Well, I'm sorry, but we do. We've got no other than Mr. Eric Roosendaal, originally Dutch, still Dutch, I suppose, but a Dutch immigrant in our midst. Good evening, Eric. How are you doing?
I'm good, David. How are you? Good evening, Rabbi. Good evening, everybody.
Hi.
Eric, we brought you in because this is a topic you felt quite passionate about, but you also, I think, bring a unique perspective as somebody who grew up in neither London nor Manchester.
100%.
But you've maybe experienced a bit of both. So tell us your thoughts.
So my thought is, give a bit of a background. I'm originally myself from Amsterdam, which is a smaller community.
How big?
It's about 30,000 Jews, I would say, nationwide, with about 90% living in Amsterdam and Amstelveen, which is like a suburb, which is like a town literally next to the south of Amsterdam, where mainly the Jewish area are. And the whole community, it's like you got two schools there. You got like a Jewish day type of school and a school which is considered Bury and Whitefield type of school. Although to get into a Jewish school, you need to be halachically Jewish. That's perhaps different than in the UK. Got about 6 schools. It got its own butcher on Schieten, own bakery, got their mikveh. So there is a good infrastructure. They even got an Eruv as a small city. So there is a good infrastructure there, but I think just because what attracted me, at least what made me look abroad, was that, if you want to get married to someone Jewish and like yourself, then there's not much choice. I mean, in terms of girls, I could basically choose from the girls in my class in Holland, and that's it. And they'll actually help
How
me
many was that, Eric?
4.
That's not a very big pool.
Exactly, that's not a very big pool.
It narrows it down.
And to be honest with you, from the people in my school, there's maybe 2 people living in Holland from the 15 kids we had in the class, and the rest all moved abroad.
So it's where did those people end up settling?
Mainly Israel. A few went to London. and a few went to the States, Belgium.
And so
Some
from
went to
your
France.
perspective, so that's your background, Eric. So then, what did you find when you came to? Did you come directly to Manchester? How did it work for you?
No, so what actually happened is I was working in Dublin in Ireland. In the time I have a background in IT, and I was working for IBM in the time, based in Dublin. But I was always working with the Dutch market, with my home market, because that's where I got my connections, my network. I've grown up. I know the people there. I know the companies there. And while living in Dublin, I've been dating my wife Amanda. We got married there. We lived there for about 2 years, and when she got pregnant with our
Brother, we're
grandson
getting, we're
John,
getting some feedback here. Does somebody have a computer on at the same time in your room, Eric, as your because then it feeds back and we get an echo. I'm sorry.
okay, is it better now?
Yeah.
Much better.
Super. I don't know even why I'm all by myself in the room, but fine. The magic. Anyways, so we were living in Dublin, and Amanda got pregnant from Joe with Joey, and then it was like, okay, we're having an issue here, because it's as much as we loved it in Dublin, it's lacking some good Jewish education. And we found that very important. So then it was like, okay, then we shouldn't stay in Dublin. And Amanda said, okay, maybe we should move them back to the UK, where she was from. But then it was, okay, what we do, are we doing London or Manchester? I was luckily enough to take my job with me to the UK. And I had customers both based in London, and I had customers based in Scotland. So I thought, now Manchester, halfway, 250 miles up north, 250 miles down south, perfect. And that's how we ended up here. And I had not much of knowledge about Manchester. To be honest, I knew London obviously quite well. I used to come there quite a lot, also as a child before.
And just to
Cool.
clarify, Amanda, your wife, is she from Manchester originally?
No, she's from London. She's from Bournemouth.
So both of you chose to settle here together.
Yeah, we both decided to settle here together. We don't have that much family here, so we literally were on our own. And thought, you know what? I think the people you build up, your connections here while you're going to school, when kids go to school and nursery and stuff. And to be honest, I'm now like nearly 6 years here. And we were very happy, but obviously because I've always been working for companies based in London, my current company is based in London. My next company I'm going to work for in 2 weeks will be also in London based. We really had always that pull factor that, is it not maybe an idea to move closer to family, and will it not make my life a bit easier to be closer to the office and my colleagues and stuff? But as I said, I've always worked with my customers based abroad. It has always been like, okay, are we going for location and then be closer to family, or are we deciding to choose for space and stay here and settle here? And we made the choice to stay here and remain here. Even
So
though
you're saying that's an economic decision, basically, in terms of house prices.
It was an economic decision, but obviously it is. I have to travel quite a lot for my work, and obviously with this pandemic, it has been less. But I mean, I had days where I've been where I left on Monday at 3:45 my house in the morning, get to work at 8 o'clock, and come back on Thursday about 10, 11-ish. And Fridays I work from home. Then you have Shabbos and Sunday, and then Monday I'm off again. So I mean, it's been really, really tough, especially in the beginning for Amanda with little Joey, our boy, to grow up. It has not been easy. It has, it came as a cost. You might have an economic gain of being here, but it's not like you get everything.
So to make it work and to sort of have, I suppose,
compromise.
To be able to earn, I'm presuming what you earn would be equivalent to a London salary in IT. It's decent enough to put yourself through the trouble of getting up at 3:45 a.m. and schlepping out to the airport and not seeing your wife and kid for another 3 or 4 days after that.
Yeah, but that comes for a cost, and also because I'm working mainly with my customer, with the Netherlands and Belgium, my home market. These jobs I would not be able to find in Manchester. If I would have been able to find these jobs in Manchester, it would have been a very easy choice. But most IT companies still prefer London over Manchester.
And do you think, Eric? So I need to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. In
Absolutely.
terms, so first of all, we're just going to talk about a general question, which I don't think it's in any way weighted for Jewish people. I think this will be the same across the board. But in general, exciting, decent, top flight IT jobs at the top of your game, if you like, you're not going to find those in Manchester, are you?
No, you don't find them there.
And that, I'm presuming, then, in many industries, I mean, I know this from the property industry as well, and different parts of the industry, you're not necessarily going to find it in provincial towns or cities, and you need to go to the capital for those things that are cutting edge, more exciting, because these companies are very often headquartered there.
100%, 100%.
Okay.
And yeah, depending on the field, as I said, you work in, like you can find a job in Manchester, you can very say, okay, you know what, because you live here, you do a career change, but that is not a very easy thing to do if that is your profession.
So my second question is weighted in favor of the Jewish community. So then, as somebody who grew up in a perhaps a much smaller European Jewish community, which has a lot of history there, but a lot of recent history that wasn't extremely healthy, if I can put it that way, and to have those communities rebuilding, really, so they can't be judged in the same way as a Manchester community or a London community. They have their own reasons for being smaller nowadays. But in terms of you arriving here in Manchester and settling into Jewish life in Manchester, does it offer you everything that you want? And second, and maybe if you were to, maybe the ship has sailed for you. Maybe you've decided to make your home here in Manchester. But what about little Joey and his generation?
I think it is what you. I think I think first of all we need to separate a few things out. When I was in Amsterdam, I was a single chap, and I could do whatever I wanted to do. Being me here in Manchester, I've not been here as a single boy. I've been here married, with a child, or now with kids, and that means that my needs have changed, because it's not just me, what's good for me, or what is per se good for my wife. My first focal thing is what is good for my kids. That has been a big change, and the fact that in a big community as Manchester, I can give my kids the chinuch that I feel is important, that I can grow them up in a where they're not going to be the only ones, where they can have lots of friends, where they can go to lots of activities, and there's lots of stuff to do for kids on Shabbos, and where there is a children's service, which I didn't have in Amsterdam when I was growing up. You know, so there's lots and lots and lots of things that I can do to inspire my children, just as my parents have tried to do that in Amsterdam when they were living there.
So there's more advantages for you raising your kids here in Manchester.
1000%, because we have considered going to Amsterdam. I had a job offer there, and we looked at it. I even had still a place to live there in that time. I recently sold my flat, but I still had my flat there, in the bang of the Jewish area. So we have considered it, but we looked then at school possibilities, and we find not a right place for, in that time, Joey. I thought he will be settling in well, even though I got my family there and I got my friends there. It is a different ballgame when you're married. You have different needs.
Can I say that I've had a very similar experience to Eric, in that I grew up in Vienna, and I would say that 90% of my friends at least my more Haredi friends, never moved back to Vienna. Because when I grew up in Vienna, so I went to school like King David, and in the afternoon I went to Cheder, and I had 4 friends that we went to Cheder together with, and two of them live in Eretz Yisrael, one of them lives in New York, and I live over here in Manchester. But that was it. That was already 2 year groups worth of people. Was 4 or 5 friends. That was it. My from friends, and they all said we don't want our children to grow up with 3 from friends. That's it. You know, it's just not enough. And when I come into Manchester, my son in his class, my son has 3 parallel classes of 20 boys each, so there's 60 boys in his year, and that's only in Tashbai. You still have, you know, Taras Emes, you got Kerem Shlema, you got Jewish Day. You know, you're looking at if you're looking at the Haredi spectrum, you really have a very, very large amount of kids for 1 year group. You could be looking at 150 boys as opposed to 4 for 1 year group. So the difference is huge. It's massive. So that even though I have had in the past job offers from Vienna as well, I turned them down because I said, I'm not taking my kids out of what they have over here and bringing them there, because they're just not going to have the opportunities there that they have over here.
Are European, I mean, you guys will have more of an idea of this than I will, although I have dabbled, as you know. European Jewish communities, is there a sense that, I mean, I see what's happening in Berlin, and that place is growing, really booming, and even places like Dusseldorf as well. So places that you thought that would never have that sort of growth, they're regrowing. Are you seeing that in places like, so the Amsterdam Jewish community, if you were to go back there today, Eric, have they made progress in the past 10 years, or are they still contracting? I'm going to ask you
No.
Vienna.
Amsterdam has made some progress, but I would say the youngsters have been growing. They're trying to still make something of the community. The youngsters have gotten more active on one end, and it even resulted in 2 more shuls that been erected since I have left, and one is actually now in the position where they even can build an own building from scratch, which is quite special for somebody that haven't seen an exponential growth in the community for such a long time. It has been mainly declining over the years. And the other side that is growing is more the Haredi part of the community, and that is with the influx of a kollel, what they have reopened. The office has been in kollel in Amsterdam. It's been shut for a couple of years. And a few guys have put the money together and reopened it, and it has been for a couple of years quite successful already. And they all come with young kids, and they fill up the schools, and they keep that going. But it's a separate part of that community that not really integrates and mingles with the rest of the community, because Amsterdam is still like an Einheitsgemeinde, so to speak. You know, it's very much like a unity community where people all mingle and mix together, whether they are very firm or clock free, I would say.
So, and that's interesting. So the growth, I mean, I suppose that is that's the story of modern Judaism, isn't it? That if you want to find growth in our Jewish communities, at least in Europe, you're going to have to look to Haredi communities for that growth. Otherwise, the other side of the community tends to shrink. Rabbi, what's it like in Vienna?
Vienna is different. It's interesting because within Vienna, what ended up happening was the following. So there were 2 different groups. There was the more Lithuanian, more yeshiva style people, and then there was the Hasidic group. The Hasidim have moved back in numbers, and so obviously the Hasidim grow at the greatest rate, I would really say. They're the ones that have double-digit kids. Most families have double-digit kids. And if you have 10 kids and 6 of those end up moving back, and you have another 10 friends, they all have 10 kids, and they all have 6 of those moving back, you now suddenly have 60 young families that are living in Vienna. And if that goes...
You also have a couple of shuls there.
That's right.
Or a football tournament.
So that part of the community in Vienna is growing tremendously. Whereas the part of the community where I grew up in, most of the people have moved out. And I think people said I always kept on saying there was a catch-22. Nobody lived there because there weren't enough people there to form a school, and there weren't enough people there to form a school because nobody lived there. Do you know what I mean? If we had sort of all come back, people said if my generation had come back, and had all come back and still lived in Vienna, and if parents had tried to push their children to live in Vienna, then they would have had a much greater growth of a community. What I will say to what Eric says also about the kollel, we've had various kollelim that have moved to Vienna. And one of the Viennese locals actually said that they made a big mistake with the kollel in Vienna, in that they went and they found some very nice Israeli people, and they went and they found some very nice British people, and they brought them over to be the kollel. And what they really should have done is they should have gone back to all of the previously Viennese people and said to them, you should come back and be our kollel over here, because there are enough of those that could have come back as well. And they would have already had some kind of time. What ended up happening is you had people that came to Vienna that lived there for 5 or 7 years, got paid a tremendous salary and had their flats paid for, and then moved back to Manchester or moved to London or moved back to Israel and had a down payment to put down on a house for the fact that they lived 5 years quite comfortably in a community in Europe that really supported them. So, and when a friend of mine who lives here now in Manchester wanted to join the kollel in Vienna, the kollel in Vienna basically said to his in-laws, you want your son-in-law to live here, you pay for it. Why should we pay for it? And it was like, which on the one hand makes sense, but on the other hand, they were like, yeah, but if you want somebody who actually stands a chance of staying in this community, you want to be paying my son-in-law to stay here because his wife is actually originally Viennese and she wouldn't mind staying here. Whereas if you bring 2 English people into Vienna, they might have a great time, but they will all move out at one point or another. And you'll find this in communities like Budapest. You'll find this in communities even like Berlin, where they have kollel coming in.
Let me ask you another question. Let me ask you another question, because I'm conscious about time for both of you and also all the people at home. From your peer group in Vienna, obviously you have people that were not as frum as you. Where have they ended up?
Most of them have stayed in Vienna. A lot of them have stayed in Vienna, and then a lot of them have made Aliyah. But a lot of them have stayed in Vienna, and interestingly enough, they have actually married. They have the same issue, even compounded than what we have. Because if you think King David has a small pool of people, well, you come to Vienna and you see how small a pool of people can get. Because at least in King David, you still have 60, 70, 80 kids in a year group, where in Vienna, we only had 15 to 20 kids. And somehow they did find a way of finding their partners within the community and moving back. And a lot of my friends still do live in Vienna and have married partners whom they knew. But I don't know, what's it like where was it, Cologne, where Miriam's from? What happened over there?
So I think over there, the only chance of your kids sort of maintaining, if they were going to be religious, it was going to be on a sort of a B'nai Akiva type path. That was a very strong movement over there. And so the connection between that community and Israel is extremely strong. But it was also the exit strategy for most kids of that age was that they were going to disappear to Israel at some point. Some have come back and settled there. Places like Berlin now is obviously places that they can go to with schools and infrastructure in place. But the question I'm going to put to both of you is, if you could sit down with, I don't know, the people that run our community on the less Haredi side of things. So if you could sit down with someone like Mark Levy and Mark Adelstone, the people that write the checks and that head up the organizations that, we're talking about people like the JLC and the Rep Council and, people that purport to run our community, who I don't know whether they're doing any forward planning for our youth. I have no idea whether they're worried about our rates of retention, whether we're keeping people here, or are we leaving it all up to you guys on the other side of things to bolster the numbers. I think that's a very, very dangerous game to play if we do that. And I think that active efforts need to be made by lay leadership here in North Manchester, South Manchester, wherever it is, to try and introduce measures that are going to engage our young. It's going to make them want to be involved with our local organizations, be involved in building their local communities, and to really stick at it, rather than run off when they see something nice and shiny in London. What is it that they should be doing, Eric, to keep Joey where he is?
Well,
Joey's generation.
to keep, I think, to be honest, if you think it's like keeping Joey where he is, I think there is a big influence. Like at the moment, you see people coming from outside of the community, and what we felt in the beginning was, people are not very. People like to sit on their own seats and don't really like to reach out. That's what I experienced at the beginning. And if you want to build a community, you want to have people over, but you also want people to stay and get involved, reach out.
Are we guilty of not being as friendly as some people think?
I'm not sure if it's on purpose, or maybe just because it is always difficult to reach out at the beginning to people that are new. But I think if you want to look, I think always if there is an opportunity, if people come to a place and explore things, I think it's always good to reach out in that sense, try to get to know the people and try to build a clique, because there is choice of community people can go to. People go shop around. How do you get the people to stick and click? Is if you try to attract them in a certain way, and if you get engaged with people, because otherwise other people will do it, and then you miss out on things. I think this is the start, because if you're building up a clique, then I think usually kids will then try to stay as well, because like they might think, okay, I give a different example. Maybe it's not really the right thing, but my dad was in his old community, and it doesn't exist anymore. But he was, as a young person, he was active in the Gerrit Kadisha. And my parents are not per se religious, but it was something that he found he was passionate in doing it and finding it important to help out. And it was something that he actually has passed on to me. And my last 2 years before
it's a huge massive.
It's a huge mix. And the last 2 years before I actually embarked on moving to Dublin, I've been a funeral director myself in Amsterdam for the Gerrit Kadisha. So literally taking care of everything from all the paperwork till the actual Levaya. But it's like something that, he have transferred that over to me, how important it is to do something for the community. If kids see that parents are engaged in stuff for the community, it can inspire them to do that as well. And then also it can potentially keep them to stay in the community, because they feel a sense of responsibility for it.
Do you know what? It's a very, very good point. And it goes, and earlier when I was talking about communal organizations that should be encouraged to engage younger people, I guess what I'm saying is younger people should be getting involved in organizations, and it's the only way that they're going to make their kids want to spend time with those organizations.
Exactly, because they feel some sense of belonging and some sense of responsibility, some achrayut, for it. And that's how you can get people to stay, because they feel, they feel it's important.
And that's very interesting, because sometimes Manchester feels like a closed shop. It's all the same sort of people on the same sort of organizations. And I wonder if sometimes it just needs shaking up, and we all open our doors and say, hey, this is open to you as well. You can come and be a stakeholder of I'm sure organizations like the Gerrit Kadisha, Misaskim, whoever it is, need always more volunteers. Eric, was it something you tried to get involved in here in Manchester, or?
I have tried. I've not really had success, to be honest with you. It's just difficult to to get in. Obviously, I've been traveling in the beginning quite a lot, so that has been difficult. It's a bit difficult to travel back for Tahar and sit 3-4 hours in the car. As much as big as the Mitzvahs, it's not always feasible. But it is something I've been looking into it and still consider it if I get the opportunity. But also there, I feel sometimes it's a bit of a closed shop.
It can be. It can be. I'm almost hesitant to ask you this question, but I'm going to. And maybe there's something we can learn from your answer. But you came to Shrubs as one of the places that you visited here in Manchester. You've davened with us. How did you find us as a community in terms of our welcome to you?
Very warm.
We
feel very happy. You know, we have moved since we started to come to Shrubberies. We feel very warm, very happy. And we really like it there as a community. It's very vibrant. There is a good mix of older crowd and younger crowd, which I find also important. You know, that it's not like one show and you feel like when you're walking in, yeah, you could ask you for Zanim Zamiris, you know, like that age.
Yeah.
You know, there is a nice and vibrant crowd, and everybody is super friendly. And I think over the years as well, you know, I built up quite a nice, you know, how you say it, like, you know, a nice vibe with the people as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm super glad to hear that answer. See, Rabbi, it's not bad. It's not all bad.
No, that gets 2 thumbs up. That answer, definitely. I mean, coming back to your question before, by the way, when you were asking about what we could, you know, asking the JLC and asking the JRC, you know, the Leadership Council, the Rep Council, people like Mark Addlestone and Mark Levy, et cetera. I don't know. You know, I hear what Eric is saying, and there is something to be said for that. But what was the points that were made at the beginning are still very valid points, which is Mark Addlestone and Mark Levy can't just, you know, make young men and young women appear in Manchester. And if you're a young man and you're looking for a young woman and you don't want to look at the same 15 or 20 girls that you went to school with, and you want a greater pool of girls, you know, how's the Jewish Leadership Council, the Jewish Rep Council going to make those appear? They aren't. And if you're someone yesterday, you know, as Daniel and Beth told me yesterday when they ate at our house, they said, you know, their son went down to London because to find a job in London is so much easier than it is to find a job in Manchester, a similar job. Now, I don't know, it's not, and I don't even think it's to do with the salaries. It's to do with the fact that there are just so many more jobs available there, which means you have more of a chance. And that means...
I wholeheartedly agree. Last week, I spoke to a group of young men who are all either on the cusp of sort of marriageable age or have just become married, but their principal problem was that they were struggling to find employment or to start businesses of their own. And
which organization set you up for that, by the way?
It was I think they call it the Chabura. It's run by a guy called Morris Newman, or Moida Newman, as you might know.
He asked me that he was going to call you, so you actually went to speak over
He
there.
actually called me. I have to tell you, I thought it was an online event. It turned out not to be, and I turned up anyway. These kids, these guys, they're not kids. They're young men.
25.
Yeah. But you know what? They are full of hope and ambition, and they all want to get on the ladder and build a career. And, you know, they all want to do something to, you know, I could have employed all 25 of them right there and then on the spot if I was just employing based on enthusiasm and attitude. It was phenomenal, honestly. But the one story that they were all telling was that a lot of these guys were stacking shelves in various local shops. Now, somebody needs to do that, but it's not what they would call a career, and it's not what they would call a life calling. So I began to sort of see it through their eyes that, you know, and these are people that would be termed as Haredi as opposed to middle of the road. And if for them it's hard to find the jobs that they want, I imagine that it's also difficult for people like me to find I mean, I've not had to find a job for for a long, long time. But
you have a qualification. You do have a degree, so it gives you a bit
yeah,
of an edge.
but do you know what? Even if I had to look for a job today, I think I would also not find it an easy decision to make. I've got 4 or 5 companies that I probably already know, that I probably already, it's a smaller pool, and I think it makes it harder. So I agree. I think I would end up having to travel in order to make money. And
Well,
I think those are things that people. I don't purport that people like Mark, any of the Marks running this town, have the answer to, but we can certainly put more resources into building sustainable and perhaps engaging career paths for people.
Yeah, well, Maxim Cohen told me, for example, that he had somebody that had come to him. Okay, I'm not going to mention the name because I'm not sure the person wants his name mentioning, but there was an individual who was, well off, that wanted to help people as an angel investor to start off careers. And other people have told me that they would do that as well, and that they're surprised that so few people come to them and say, look, I got this great idea. All I need is £20,000. And if you lend me the £20,000, you can play Shark Tank or Dragon's Den over here. And, you'll take X percentage. And this is what but
you could, I get the impression that you could play Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, whatever you wish to call it, here in North Manchester for a long, long time. It would be much better than playing Monopoly here. But there are, I looked around that room last week and I saw 25 faces who were ready to drop whatever it was that was important to them and do it if I said to them this was a career. And I think we can get better at doing that. And I think there are things that we can do as organizations, as a community. Eric's right to a certain extent. We tend to be a little bit blinkered. So I'm all right, Jack. My business is running okay. Don't ask me for a job. I haven't got one for you, and I can't help you, I'm afraid. But if anything comes up, I'll pass your name around. That sort of vision is not good enough anymore. And I think we need to actually sit down and think, okay, we're all raising children. I have a small Jewish family, and to have a small Jewish family is 3 kids. Rabbi, you're a larger Jewish family.
Size, I would say medium-sized.
Medium size, but so the range can be anything from 1 to 10, 1 to 12, depending on which side of this religious spectrum you may be on, or how gregarious you are, who knows. But either way, we need to make sure that there are opportunities there for those children, and maybe that actually answers the question of how they're going to buy that house eventually. So I actually think that we need to do some more thinking, and it's a much, much bigger question for much bigger people than us, maybe. But we need to devote some time and resources into making sure not only that we have enough shops to feed everybody and enough restaurants for people to eat in, but it's also panos, and it's also infrastructure. And I think that's something that we can do better on.
But I think it all goes hand in hand, David, because if people leave, infrastructure will be less. Because if food we all need at some point, but if it's going to be more difficult to all these places, to keep themselves up, things going to shut down, and that will lead at the end of the day to a smaller community. I don't say that is things that I see so quickly happening here in Manchester. But it certainly have happened in smaller communities where we've already seen it, where people have come to Manchester and smaller communities have shut now.
It's very interesting, this comment over here. And I know, Clive, this is probably a subject that's fairly close to your heart. I know that one of your kids has grown up to be a chassid of one of the popular movements. But Clive says here, Bel, Satmar, Chabad, Breslov are the main attractions for young families moving to Manchester, and they are the future of our community. I guess really then it becomes the more secular side of the community, perhaps, if I could put it that way, or the more middle of the road side of the community needs to wake up and decide whether or not it wants to exist at all in 10 years' time.
I mean, I would say to Clive's comment that I wouldn't say that's 100% true because, the growth of an area like Sedgley Park is really mainly fueled not by Bel Samar Chabad or Breslov, but really by more like Haredi, but Lithuanian style, Litvische people. And you'll find over there very few people. Now you go down to Lower Broughton, and that's where you find exactly the people where Clive said. But we have new areas that have opened up that 10 years ago didn't exist. Lower Broughton didn't exist. Today it's full of Jews. Crumsall, I don't have to tell you what's going on in Crumsall, but around where King David is, all the way up to the metro station. Any house that comes up, there's young people, young Jewish families buying. Young Jewish families are buying all the way down out to Middleton Road. The whole area near Mead Hill is being filled up. We have overflowed in all directions. We really have, and the community is going tremendously. But I think the points that you make about giving people opportunities here is important. I know in Vienna at one point they got together and they did want to say to people, listen, if you want to move back, there are a lot of wealthy people over here, and they will give you jobs and they'll give you opportunities for you to do something, for you to become something. Because if people come back to a community and there's no jobs and there's nothing for them to work in, then there's no pull for them to come back. And London has a big pull because there are just so many things you can do there that, you stand a chance. You stand a better chance than you stand here.
Anyway, if anybody that is of an older generation is watching this and they're wondering whether or not it's worthwhile them devoting their energy to trying to solve this problem, let me tell you something, folks. If your kids get married and they move to London and they end up having grandchildren and you want to be near those grandchildren, you will one day be calling me round to your house, and the conversation we're going to have is not going to be very happy, because I'll tell you your house is worth this, and you'll tell me I need to spend double that to get a house that is half the size of the one that you're living in, because you want to be closer to them. And so that is a conversation that happens an awful lot, where I see people that are moving to London to be closer to their kids, but at their time of life to be making those economic decisions where literally they end up putting themselves right, they're winding the
clock back to the bottom of the rung.
Yeah, completely. And it's heartbreaking in some cases.
I've seen the opposite. I've seen people move here from London. They sold their house for over $1 million, bought a house here for $300,000, and are left with a fortune of money in the bank that they can retire on. I don't know, $700,000 is a fortune, but what I mean. But it gives them a real nice cushion that they're able to live on.
Clive, I wonder, you're obviously listening, you're writing this. Clive has said these families are 10 plus kids and will overwhelm other sectors. Clive, nobody's done more for our sector, if you like, than you over the years, both at the Jewish Rep Council and also at Shrubs, obviously. Are you saying that it's a fait accompli? Or are you saying that we're best up giving up? Or should we make a concerted effort to try something different? I guess that's a question for everybody for the future, even if Clive doesn't answer that right now.
Right. I think we've reached 9:30.
I think so. We're going to let Eric get back to. He's got to be up at 3:45 in the morning, right?
No. Thank God for the pandemic. We don't have to do that anymore. I'm gonna get a 7:45, and at 8 o'clock I will switch to my computer. That's
okay. Well, that's the
deal nowadays.
That's more manageable. Thank you very much for joining us, Eric. Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for listening at home. If anybody's got any ideas that they ever want to share, both in terms of topics for Sunday night or answers to some of the questions that we've raised, if you're not watching this live on the night, but you watch it back afterwards, as I know a lot of people do, we're very touched that you take the time to listen to us, but B, we are also interested in hearing your answers. So if you want to send them in, you know how to get in touch. Everybody have a great week, and it's been great to chat with you all. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.